Experience. There are moments in life when silence speaks louder than words. Silence is not weakness. Silence is not ignorance. Silence, when guided by God, is strength. Experience. The Bible tells us in Ecclesiastes 3:7, there is a time to be silent and a time to speak. The problem is many of us love to reverse it. We speak when we should be silent. Experience. And we stay silent when we should speak. But when God calls us to silence, it's never without reason. His silence is strategic. His silence is protective. Experience. His silence is purposeful. So let me give you 5 reasons why God sometimes wants you to remain silent. Experience. The word of God makes it very clear that the tongue carries tremendous power. It's small, but it is dangerous when left unchecked. James tells us in chapter 3, verse 5, experience, that the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. That spark is often our words. Experience. Many of us underestimate how quickly one sentence, one careless remark, one moment of frustration can turn into a flame that destroys relationships, careers, families, experience, and even our own spiritual witness. Sometimes God tells us to remain silent because silence is his way of protecting us from sinning with our mouth. You may not realize it, experience, but one word spoken in anger can do more damage than a knife. Words pierce hearts, they cut deep, and they leave scars that no apology can fully erase. Think back on your own life. Experience. How many times have you regretted what you said? How many nights have you lain awake replaying a conversation, wishing you had just kept quiet? That's the weight of the tongue. Experience. You see, once a word leaves your mouth, you cannot pull it back in. You can apologize, you can ask for forgiveness, but the sound of that word has already done its damage. Experience. God knows this, which is why he sometimes presses on your spirit to stay quiet. You think you're losing by not speaking up, but in reality, experience, you're winning because you're not falling into the trap of sin. Silence becomes a spiritual shield. When your flesh is itching to clap back, to respond, to argue, to defend, experience, silence steps in and holds you back. And in that moment, you're not just keeping peace with people, you're keeping peace with God. Brains, because scripture tells us in Matthew 20:36 that we will give an account for every careless word we speak. Every single word. That means silence isn't just a good habit. Experience. It's eternal protection. God is literally saving you from judgment when he teaches you to remain quiet. And let's be honest, much of our speaking comes from a place of pride. Experience. We want the last word. We want people to know we're right. We want our opinion to be heard. But pride is dangerous, and it often manifests through our speech. Experience. Proverbs 109 says, when words are many, sin is not absent, but he who holds his tongue is wise. Did you catch that? The more you talk, the more likely you are to sin. Experience. But wisdom is shown in restraint. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing at all. Have you ever noticed how Jesus handled silence? When he stood before Pilate, experience, accused by the chief priests, he didn't argue. He didn't try to explain himself. He didn't defend his reputation. He remained silent. Why? Experience. Because he knew his Father was in control. His silence was not weakness. It was strength under submission. If the Son of God himself could remain silent in the face of accusation, experience, how much more should we? Let's make it practical. Imagine you're in an argument with someone close to you. Your emotions are heated. Your voice is rising. Experience. And your pride is pushing you to win the argument. In that moment, silence can feel like losing. But in reality, experience, silence is victory because it refuses to let sin enter the conversation. Silence is saying, I value this relationship more than I value my ego. Silence is saying, experience, I'm not going to allow the devil to use my mouth as his weapon. Silence is surrendering your words to God and letting him carry the weight. Experience. Sometimes silence even protects you from gossip. Gossip is one of the most subtle but destructive sins in the church and in life. Experience. People love to pull you into conversations that tear others down. And you may think you're just sharing information, but really you're spreading fire. Experience. If you remain silent in that moment, you're not only protecting the person being talked about, you're protecting your own soul from contamination. Proverbs 21:23 says, experience. He who guards mouth and his tongue keeps himself from calamity. That calamity is what silence saves you from. And here's another truth. Experience. Silence can stop generational patterns of sin. Maybe you grew up in a household where people shouted, cursed, and cut each other with words. You don't have to repeat that cycle. Experience. By choosing silence, you break the chain. By choosing silence, you allow peace to enter the room. By choosing silence, you show your children, your spouse, your friends, experience that there is another way to handle conflict. Silence becomes a ministry. So when God tells you to remain silent, it is not because he wants you to be passive. Experience, it is because he wants to protect you. Protect you from words you can't take back. Protect you from arguments that don't honor him. Experience, protect you from a tongue that wants to ignite a fire. Silence is God's way of keeping your heart pure and your hands clean. Every time you bite your tongue, experience, every time you walk away, every time you choose not to speak when the flesh is ready to lash out, you are walking in obedience. Experience. And obedience is always better than words spoken out of anger. Silence then is not empty. Silence is full of power, full of protection. Experience. Full of God's grace covering your mouth so that your soul won't be stained by sin. And when you let God guard your tongue through silence, experience, you will discover peace where there would have been conflict, healing where there would have been hurt, and blessing where there would have been regret. Many of us have forgotten the power of silence. We have grown so accustomed to filling every moment with words, our thoughts, our defenses, experience, that we rarely stop to let God speak. Yet the scriptures teach us that sometimes our words are not needed. What is needed is our quietness, our stillness, our willingness to step back and allow God to work on our behalf. Think about Exodus 14:14, where God tells the Israelites, the Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. That stillness, that quiet, that refusal to act or speak prematurely was not passive. It was active trust in God. In silence, experience, God finds a space to operate, a space to move in power, and a space to demonstrate his authority in ways that our words could never accomplish. Many times we try to speak for God. Experience. We want everyone to know our side of the story, to understand our vision, to see our struggle. But when we speak too quickly, when we rush to defend ourselves, experience, we can actually obstruct God's plan. Our explanations can dilute his purpose. Our words, even well-meaning, can cloud his message. Silence, in contrast, allows God to intervene. Experience. When you remain silent, you are saying, whether consciously or unconsciously, Lord, I trust you to handle this. I will not use my tongue to justify, defend, or fight. Experience. I will let you be my advocate. And let me tell you, when God speaks for you, no earthly defense can match it. Consider a courtroom scenario. Experience. Imagine standing accused before a judge, and a lawyer steps forward with every possible piece of evidence, argument, and justification. But then imagine a divine attorney, perfect, experience, omniscient, and all-knowing, steps up and speaks the truth that not only exonerates you, but silences your accusers completely. Experience. That is what happens when you allow God to fight for you through your silence. Your words may be flawed. His word is perfect. Your timing may be off. His timing is flawless. Experience. Your logic may fail. His wisdom is unassailable. When you step aside, you create a divine platform for God to showcase his power and faithfulness. Experience. Silence also demonstrates maturity and spiritual wisdom. Too often, the impulsive tongue gets people into trouble. Experience. How many arguments have escalated because someone felt the need to explain themselves, to justify, or to prove a point? In those moments, silence is strength. Experience. Silence shows that you are not controlled by emotion or pride, but by the Spirit of God. It shows that you are willing to yield control to God. Experience. Trusting that he sees what you cannot see, that he knows what you do not know, and that his intervention will exceed anything you could accomplish with your own words. Scripture gives us examples of this principle in action. Jesus himself, in his trials before Pilate, did not defend himself verbally. He did not argue, explain, or plead his case. He remained silent, allowing God's plan of redemption to unfold without interference. His silence spoke louder than any defense could. Similarly, there are times in our lives when we are attacked, misunderstood, or falsely accused, and the best action is not to speak, but to trust God. Our silence opens the door for divine vindication. Silence also prevents us from making promises we cannot keep or statements we cannot control. When we speak in haste, we risk committing ourselves to outcomes beyond our ability or understanding. By remaining silent or protecting ourselves from overextending, overpromising, or misrepresenting reality, silence allows God to orchestrate events in his perfect way, instead of us trying to force solutions with imperfect words. Moreover, silence cultivates humility. It reminds us that we are not the ultimate authority, that our understanding is limited, and that our timing is imperfect. God desires that we recognize our dependency on him. Silence, therefore, is an act of surrender. It is a declaration that we trust God to work on our behalf. That we are willing to step back from the spotlight, and that we understand he is the ultimate defender, advocate, and orchestrator of our lives. When you practice silence in the right moments, you create space for God's miraculous intervention. You create room for his word to speak to hearts that your arguments cannot reach. You allow his spirit to work in ways that your human reasoning cannot comprehend. Experience. Silence becomes a tool for divine action, a channel for supernatural results. And when the outcome is revealed, people will see the hand of God unmistakably. Experience, not your own effort or words. So learn to hold your tongue when the flesh urges you to defend yourself. Learn to step back when circumstances tempt you to argue or explain. Experience. Learn to let God's voice rise above the noise, because there is power in silence, power that allows God to speak for you, power that vindicates you in ways nothing else can experience, and power that demonstrates that when you trust Him completely, you need nothing else, not even your own words, to secure victory. Experience. Silence is more than simply refraining from speaking. It is a discipline of the soul, a deliberate posture of the heart that trains us to hear God, to trust His timing, experience, and to develop spiritual maturity. Too often we confuse business, chatter, and constant activity with progress, but in reality, experience, true growth often comes in quiet moments when we stop speaking, stop reacting, and stop trying to control the outcome. The psalmist tells us in Psalm 4:10, be still, experience, and know that I am God. This stillness is not a suggestion. It is an invitation to allow God to shape us from the inside out. Experience. Silence builds spiritual discipline because it trains us to rely not on our own understanding, our own words, or our own impulses, but on God alone. When we are silent, experience, we are forced to confront ourselves. Our impatience, our pride, our frustration, and our fears rise to the surface. When words are absent, the heart becomes exposed. Experience. And it is in those moments that discipline is forged. Discipline does not grow in the noise, it grows in the quiet. Discipline grows when we resist the urge to react immediately. Experience. When we hold our tongue, when we choose to pray instead of argue, when we wait for God's instruction instead of rushing ahead. Each time we practice silence, experience, we strengthen our spiritual muscles. Each time we resist the impulse to speak before thinking, we become more grounded, more patient, and more aligned with God's purposes. Experience. Silence also cultivates self-control, which is one of the fruits of the Spirit described in Galatians 5. Self-control cannot exist where the tongue is uncontrolled. Experience. Every time we bite back a harsh word, refuse to argue, or stay calm in the face of provocation, we are practicing self-mastery. This is not weakness. Experience. It is strength under authority. It is proof that our spirit can govern our flesh, that our actions are dictated not by emotion, but by the Spirit of God dwelling within us. Experience. Over time, this discipline becomes a habit, and the habit becomes a lifestyle. And when spiritual discipline becomes a lifestyle, God can trust us with greater responsibility and greater revelation. There is also a teaching dimension to silence. When we are quiet, we create space to listen. Experience. We begin to recognize the difference between our own voice and the voice of God. Often, our lives are cluttered with noise, mental chatter, social media opinions, expectations, and we lose the ability to discern the subtle leading of the Spirit. Silence clears that clutter. Silence tunes our spiritual ears. Experience. It is in quietness that God speaks in ways we can understand, whether it is guidance for a decision, comfort in a trial, or direction for our purpose. Experience. Silence prepares us to receive what words alone cannot teach. Furthermore, silence strengthens character. Life will test us in ways that words cannot prepare us for. Experience. There will be moments of weight, of rejection, of misunderstanding, and of challenge. Experience. If we have learned to be disciplined in small things, by keeping quiet when we want to speak, experience, by being still when we want to act, we are better prepared for the larger tests of life. Spiritual discipline is cumulative. It grows with repeated practice. Experience. One moment of patience here, one decision to remain calm there, one refusal to argue. Experience all contribute to a resilient character that can endure trials without losing faith or composure. Silence also teaches humility. When we stop speaking, experience, we acknowledge that we are not the center of the universe. We recognize that God's wisdom is higher than ours, that His timing is perfect, experience, and that His purposes are greater than our plans. Humility is developed in the spaces where our ego is quiet and God's Spirit is allowed to lead. Experience. We learn that we do not need to announce our victories or defend our honor constantly because God Himself is our advocate and our source of validation. Experience. And let us not overlook the relational benefits of silence. Often conflicts escalate because people cannot control their tongues. Arguments, misunderstandings, experience, and broken relationships frequently occur not because of what was done, but because of what was said. By practicing silence, we learn to pause, to reflect, to respond with wisdom rather than emotion. Silence becomes a tool of peace, a way to preserve relationships, and a means of exhibiting God's love in action. Ultimately, experience. Silence builds spiritual discipline because it teaches dependence on God. It reminds us that we do not have to fix everything, that our words are not always necessary. Experience, and that God is fully capable of carrying his purposes to completion. Every time we choose silence over speaking in haste, every time we resist the urge to control the situation, experience, we are demonstrating trust in God. We are training our hearts to wait, to listen, and to follow his leading. And the more we practice this discipline, experience, the stronger our spirit becomes, the sharper our discernment grows, and the more effective we become in living out God's will in every area of life. Silence, then, experience, is not empty. It is formative. It is the soil in which spiritual discipline takes root. It is the forge in which patience, humility, and self-control are refined. Experience. It is the classroom in which God teaches us to depend fully on him. And as we embrace silence, we discover that the quiet moments are often the most powerful, the most productive, and the most transformative moments of our spiritual journey. Silence is one of the most underrated weapons in the life of a believer. The enemy thrives on our reactions. Experience, he waits for us to speak in anger, to vent frustration, to declare doubt, or to reveal fear. Every word spoken out of impatience, pride, or anxiety gives him a foothold. Experience. The enemy wants to see us stumble, not only in our actions, but in our speech. He desires to use our tongues against us, to manipulate our words into his advantage. Experience, and to create chaos where peace should reign. Yet when we practice silence, we deny him the very thing he relies upon, the ability to manipulate our reactions. Experience. Silence confuses the enemy. It robs him of his weapon. Think about it. The devil counts on you to react the moment provoked. He counts on you to defend your reputation. Experience. To explain yourself, to lash out. When you respond in anger or frustration, the enemy celebrates because now he has a foothold. But when you refuse to respond, experience, when you resist the impulse to argue or defend, he is thrown off balance. Silence leaves him scrambling. Experience, he cannot predict what you will do next because you are not moving according to fleshly impulses. Your stillness, your refusal to engage in the expected way, experience, disrupts his plans and demonstrates that you are no longer a passive participant in the spiritual battle. This principle is clearly demonstrated in the life of Jesus. Experience, during his trial before Pilate and before the Jewish leaders, Jesus remained silent in the face of false accusations. He did not retaliate. He did not defend himself. Experience, he did not engage in debate or explanation. His silence was deliberate. It frustrated the enemy's schemes and prevented the spread of deception. Experience, by not giving in to the expected reaction, Jesus kept the enemy from gaining a foothold while simultaneously allowing God's plan to unfold perfectly. His silence was strategic, experience, and it confused the enemy's purpose entirely. Silence also confuses the enemy because it signals control and trust. When you choose not to respond, when you choose not to react, you are effectively saying, I am not moved by fear, anger, or pressure. I trust God to handle this situation. That declaration of trust weakens the enemy's power. Experience, he cannot intimidate or manipulate someone who refuses to give in to emotion or fleshly impulses. Every time you respond with measured calm or deliberate stillness, you are reclaiming authority over the situation and asserting God's sovereignty in your life. Furthermore, silence disrupts gossip and slander. Experience. The enemy loves it when people speak in haste, spreading half-truths or rumors, because that creates division and mistrust. When you remain silent, experience, you refuse to participate in the enemy's schemes. You prevent him from using your words to harm relationships or damage reputations. Proverbs 21:23 tells us, experience, he who guards his mouth and his tongue keeps himself from calamity. Guarding your words in silence is not passive experience. It is an active spiritual strategy that protects both your life and the lives of those around you. Silence also creates anticipation, and anticipation works against the enemy. When others expect a reaction and you refuse to give one, they become unsettled. The enemy thrives on predictability, but silence introduces uncertainty. Experience. He cannot anticipate your next move. And when he cannot anticipate, he cannot control. Your stillness in the right moment shifts the advantage from him to you. Experience. The enemy's confidence is shaken because your trust in God has rendered his manipulation ineffective. Moreover, silence strengthens your position in prayer and spiritual warfare. Experience. Every time you refuse to speak in haste or react in fear, you are creating a spiritual opening for God to intervene. Your silence allows him to fight your battles. Experience, it prevents the enemy from gaining ground and positions you to receive divine strategies that words alone cannot produce. When you combine silence with prayer, experience, you are operating with both restraint and power. That combination is devastating to the enemy's plans. Finally, silence confuses the enemy because it demonstrates obedience. The enemy relies on disobedience, on acting outside God's will, on responding to circumstances in the flesh. When you remain silent in the spirit, refusing to react according to worldly expectations, you are demonstrating allegiance to God rather than to the enemy's schemes. Experience. This obedience weakens the enemy's influence and strengthens your authority. Silence becomes an act of spiritual warfare, a tool that honors God. Experience, and a strategy that neutralizes the enemy's attacks before they even begin. In the end, silence is not a sign of weakness or passivity. It is a sign of power, control, experience, and trust in God. It is a weapon that confuses the enemy, a shield that protects you from his manipulations, and a strategy that ensures God's purposes are fulfilled. Every time you resist the urge to speak impulsively, every time you choose stillness over reaction, you are claiming victory in the spiritual battle. Silence confuses the enemy. Experience strengthens your faith and positions you for God's supernatural intervention. It is a divine tool, a spiritual weapon, and a mark of a disciplined, obedient heart ready to see God's hand move in mighty ways. Silence is not just about restraint. It is about preparation. Experience. There are moments in life when our minds are so cluttered with noise, opinions, and distractions that we cannot hear God's voice, even if he speaks directly to us. Experience. That is why God often calls his people to silence, to create a space where his spirit can be clearly heard. The prophet Elijah provides a perfect example of this in 1 Kings 19. Elijah had experienced tremendous victories and yet faced immense discouragement. He fled from Jezebel in fear and despair, expecting God to act in dramatic ways. God first sent the wind, then the earthquake, and then the fire. But Elijah did not encounter God in any of these powerful events. It was only in the gentle whisper, the quiet voice, that Elijah recognized the presence and direction of God. If Elijah had been too loud, too reactive, or too absorbed in noise, he would have missed the very guidance God intended to give him. Silence prepares the heart to receive revelation. When we remain quiet, we are able to focus, reflect, and position ourselves spiritually to recognize God's leading. Words, whether spoken by us or by others, can drown out divine instruction. In a world full of constant chatter and opinions, silence acts as a filter. It allows us to distinguish between human ideas and divine guidance. Without it, we may confuse our own thoughts with God's voice, making decisions that are based on emotion rather than eternal wisdom. Silence, therefore, becomes the laboratory in which discernment is developed. It teaches us to listen intently, to be sensitive to the subtle promptings of the Holy Spirit, and to wait for the exact timing of God's instruction. Silence also strengthens faith. Waiting quietly before God without rushing to action or explanation. Demonstrates trust in his sovereignty. Every time we resist the urge to speak impulsively, we declare that God is in control. We affirm that his timing is perfect. That his understanding is complete and that his plans will not fail. Faith grows in these quiet moments because we are relying on God rather than our own words or efforts. Just as a seed grows unseen beneath the soil before it emerges, faith is cultivated in the quiet depths of our hearts before it manifests in our circumstances. Furthermore, silence cultivates humility. When we stop trying to control outcomes with our words, we acknowledge our dependence on God. We admit that we do not have all the answers. That our perspective is limited and that God's wisdom surpasses human understanding. Silence humbles the heart because it teaches us that sometimes the most effective action is not speaking at all, but listening and obeying. Humility is essential for spiritual growth, and it is in silence that humility is refined and perfected. Silence also creates a posture of readiness. When we quiet our hearts, we are better prepared to recognize opportunities, warnings, and confirmations from God. Just as a soldier prepares before a battle, the believer who practices silence is positioned to act with clarity and confidence when God speaks. The ear that has been trained in quietness can detect the faintest whisper from heaven, while the tongue that has been restrained is ready to speak only when directed by God. In this way, silence is both preparation and protection, equipping us for obedience at the right time. Moreover, silence fosters intimacy with God. In the absence of constant talking, our spirits are drawn closer to his presence. Prayer is not only about speaking, but also listening. When we stop filling the conversation with our own words, we open the door to hear God's thoughts, his guidance, and his comfort. These moments of intimacy deepen our relationship with him and reinforce the trust necessary to follow his leading faithfully. Silence also sharpens our spiritual sensitivity. The world is loud, full of opinions, distractions, and pressures that compete for our attention. When we practice silence, We learn to discern the difference between worldly noise and God's still, small voice. We begin to recognize his patterns, his confirmations, and his nudges in our lives. Experience. This sensitivity is essential for making decisions that align with his will and for navigating life with divine wisdom rather than human instinct. Finally, experience silence is transformative. It shapes our character, aligns our hearts with God's purposes, and prepares us to act at the perfect moment. When we cultivate quietness, we are not passive, we are actively preparing for divine revelation. Every silent moment spent waiting, listening, and trusting God builds a foundation for clarity, obedience, experience, and spiritual breakthrough. The whisper of God becomes unmistakable, and our lives are marked by decisions and actions that reflect his wisdom, power, and timing. In essence, experience. Silence is a sacred tool. It prepares the heart to hear God's voice, sharpens discernment, strengthens faith, fosters humility, cultivates readiness. Experience. It deepens intimacy with the Creator. The believer who masters silence is positioned to receive guidance that others may miss. Experience. To act with wisdom that transcends human understanding and to walk in alignment with God's perfect will. Through silence, God speaks, and when we listen, our lives are transformed.